Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Tennessee Fats, and today I'm doing the fourth in my series of Robert E. Howard's Battle Royales. Now in this series, what I do is I take an original Robert E. Howard story, I'm going to walk through what happened in that story, and then I'm going to compare and contrast two different comic book interpretations that are already out there in the world. And then at the end of this, I'm going to say, this is the one you should probably buy if you're looking for what's closest to the original Robert E. Howard written work. At the end of the series, the whole goal here is that if you were out there shopping and you said to yourself, I'm only going to buy one of each of these, which should I spend my money on? Well, you're going to have a complete list. Now, today's a cool story because we're doing the longest Robert E. Howard story that he ever wrote about this character, and that's Red Nails. Now, a lot of people have been sort of pro this story, some people have been against this story, some people have been really critical of it. At the end of the day, I'm not here to say whether the story is good, bad, or otherwise. That's not the point of this series. But I am going to say this. The last time I read this story, I was in my teens. So being able to go back and read it now is kind of a cool moment for me. And being able to compare and contrast it to other comics, one of which that I actually read back then, also really cool, trying to go back and see how my own interpretation of the story has changed. That's an aside. That's not what we're talking about today. So without any further ado, let's get into the book and let's start the actual analysis. And we are back. Excellent. Now at this point in time, I'm going to do the obligatory YouTube thing, and I'm going to say, please like and subscribe to this video. If you like your Robert E. Howard content and you enjoy this series that I'm going for, by all means, click that little icon down in the lower right and subscribe to the channel. It's funny, I actually noticed in the last video I did of this that we actually got more views on that one than the ones to date. And I think part of that is because of the actual likes and the people clicking through at the early date when it was released. So fancy the way that YouTube analytics thing is working. And another piece of admin, peeling back the veil of how we do things here at the Tennessee Fats channel, we're not a low budget studio, we are the no budget studio. I'd prefer to spend the money on the books as opposed to, fancy, things and technology, because that's just not my shtick. But I noticed when I was adding the chapters to the last video that the audio quality sounded like I was talking to you from the inside of a train station. And I've never found my voice to be one that it sounds like it talks from the inside of a train station. So I said, so we hooked a mic up on this one. So if you notice a difference, by all means, post a comment and let me know. If you want me to go back to the other way, well, by all means, let me know, do that too. So once again, here's the book. This is my Robert E. Howard personal Bible, the one I go from. This is where I read all of my materials. And the story we're doing today is Red Nails, as I mentioned earlier. Now, it's funny that this is where I get all of my Robert E. Howard stuff, and this is where I do my reading. But, and this is particularly neat, I found my original copy of this in my library. Look at that. A little paperback. And I tell you, I found this in the library when I was going through it, and I was like, what the heck? And I think I originally bought this for what? The price was really... I bought this for $2. You can see it written in pencil right there. $2 I bought this for. And what's cool about this is I picked this up before I started reading the story out of here. And I thought to myself, this is an awful fat book. This story is only like, I think, 60, 70 pages. How does this... Well, this book actually contains a series of stories. Contains 3 of the greatest series of Conan: Red Nails, Shadow of Zambula, and Beyond the Black River. So I actually might read some of my stories out of this one next time if I want something, more pocket-sized. And this one has all sorts of... Look, there's an original piece of art from The Weird Tales. That I believe that's the Red Nails story. Yeah, that is a scene from Red Nails. And the other thing I like about this is, check this out. Little added feature there. Look at that. Fold out painted work right there. That is really cool. I did not even, I'll tell you, I didn't remember owning this. Cool find. If you do find this, by all means read it this way. It's kind of cool to actually be able to read something in a little paperback format as opposed to the clunky. So, that aside, here's the story of Red Nails. Red Nails, boom. This is, as I mentioned earlier, the longest Robert E. Howard story that he wrote about Conan. And it's kind of a weird one because it's sort of later in Conan's life. Conan has been working basically as a mercenary, and he has been working with Valeria of the Red Brotherhood, who has been in other stories. And Valeria has stabbed somebody because obviously somebody's advances were unwanted, and Conan chases after. Really, the nut of the story is he chases after, and the two of them find themselves in one heck of a complex adventure. They start off in a forest which has, as near as I can tell, dinosaurs living in it, or at least a dinosaur, that they end up having to kill because it's trying to kill them. They get out of the forests in the process of killing the dinosaur and find themselves in a vast deserted plain heading towards a walled city. The walled city is an odd one, though, because the walled city doesn't have any streets. The entire walled city is basically like a giant Borg cube. It's just a giant... Think of it as a giant house with hallways between rooms and antechambers. And within that, there's what you'll call a civil war going on between two different factions of people that basically forced their way into the city and took it over. The people who lived there did not create the city. The people who created the city, unfortunately, their population had just dwindled away, and they were slaughtered by this group of people who moved into the city. And kind of an interesting sort of story goes through as you get into a little bit of the politics between these two parties. The reference to what was originally a third party, who was playing the middle, almost like Clint Eastwood in Fistful of Dollars. Unfortunately, this third party, things didn't work out as well as they did for Clint Eastwood. And as a result, he finds himself banished to the catacombs after being tortured horrendously by the people who captured him. But at the end of the day, basically everybody within the city kind of kills themselves. It's a long, involved battle wherein Conan and Valeria find themselves to really just be the trigger points that led to the final culmination of their 50-year-long civil war. And you'd think, okay, well, I guess that's the end of the story. Well, it's not quite the end of the story, because there's actually an element here where a witch is involved, and she tries to steal the soul of Valeria so that she can extend her unnatural life. And the third party, that Clint Eastwood character that I mentioned earlier, ends up finding their way back magically at the 11th hour and basically zaps everybody with a lightning rod and kills them all prior to Conan killing him. And then, because there's a witch involved, Valeria basically slitting the throat of this witch, and then they just leave. Kind of a rambling story, granted, and I think that might be why people are somewhat critical of this story, because it just sort of limbers along. The other piece of the story that I think people might be critical of is really the way Robert E. Howard just... I guess this has to do with the ideas at the time. Robert E. Howard's view of female characters and their parts to play in this. Granted, Valeria is a very strong character, an incredibly strong character that basically demands to be treated as an equal to a man, which is fine. But basically the world is attacking this strong female character throughout the story, basically for her femininity, which, I don't know. I don't know. It's just one of those aspects of the story that I think that is where people really do have an issue with it, and I think that is where the largest complaints about this come from. But that is the nut of the story. So there you go. That's the story. You now know it. If you hadn't read that yet, as I said in my last video, the story's over 100 years old. I don't need to give you a spoiler alert. It's over 100 years old. Go read about it. Anyway, that's that one. Once again, there's the copy of the paperback version that I showed you guys. Very cool to find that. Now, what am I comparing and contrasting today? Well, I am going to compare the Ablaze version of this. This is the Ablaze hardcover volume 1. This one has Queen of the Black Coast and Red Nails in it. So we're going to compare that. And we're going to compare it to Marvel's version of this. Now, you're looking at this and you're saying, what the heck is this, Tennessee Fats? Well, hold on for a second. Let me clarify this for you. This is a colorized reprint, all right? Now, this comes from, you've heard me talk about this before, a Strange Tales story. This is Strange Tales number 3, by the way. But this story actually was contained in Strange Tales. It was a small story in Strange Tales number 2, and it continued into Strange Tales number 3. So what this is a color reprint of these black and white Strange Tales stories. But, as I mentioned before, I'm somewhat careful with my original Strange Tales, especially when I went out and I bought these beautiful, pristine condition Strange Tales early issues. I will not be tearing these open and going through these today. What we'll be reviewing today is the version of the story in my trade paperback. But I will also show you this and walk through this as well, because this is exactly the same thing, it just happens to be color, all right? So let's not split hairs here. Let's just go right into it and say, what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about the Cimmerian. Let's start with the Ablaze version. Now, the Ablaze version came out not too long ago, and you will know, and you will mention, and you will note that at the beginning of this, one of the things I talked about was perhaps people's issues with Red Nails is, you know, the way female characters are perhaps portrayed in it. The Ablaze version of this, and these are European comics that are then retranslated into English and reproduced and distributed here in North America with some fantastic art. Don't get me wrong. And the other thing that I like about these, especially when you get this hardcover version, is inside they have this fancy map. You've all heard me talk about the maps that I love about the Hyborian Age. Because this was originally published in French, all these names are translated from English to French, or at least as what they think would be French, like Mère du Vayet, Vayet. But what you're looking at here is taking place right there, and they actually have a spot on the map for it. There's Darfur, where Conan and Valeria were mercenaries, and then headed south, and that's the city they ended up in. Kind of cool. I like the way they include that there. It really gives you that sense of context. Now, the first image you see when you go through the story is, that is a lot of female bums. And another thing that you'll notice when you're going through this is all these women are topless. Bear that in mind. That is a comment that's going to come back here. My 2 cents on this story. The art in this is good. I have no issue with the art in this. I like the art. The story in here I found was short. It stopped, it skipped, it sort of jumped portions of the Robert E. Howard story. I'm flipping through here because this is the start of the story where they're in the jungle. I think this is possibly the best representation of the dragon, or the dinosaur, that Robert E. Howard describes in his story. It's best done here. I think these guys really nailed it. And I do believe this is a better version of this particular dinosaur, or this dragon, than you're going to get in the Barry Windsor Smith one. Not to slight Barry Windsor Smith, but I do think this is more close to the actual original story. So they have a whole bunch of the story where he's dealing with the dragon at the front, which was a very large part of the written work. Conan in this is seen to blind the dinosaur, then has him chase him out over the desert, and then slices him, and then he drops dead, probably because of the poison that was already in him before the slice. Remember that is a key point. They then get to the city, and this is where things get a little off. So the city, you can see it right here in the background. Right there. It's the city, and the way the art goes and the way the drawing goes in this, I'm sorry, but this to me seems very, I'm going to say, Mesoamerican. There's another picture of the city right there. When you start to see the support characters, you see the weapons they're using. I don't know. To me, I don't know. That seems very Incan or Olmec to me. And that is not what Robert E. Howard was going for in his book. Robert E. Howard, when he was describing the origins of the builders of this city, was very clear that they came from the East. Now, the East. It's very difficult to sort of get a sense of what the East is, because obviously this is a made-up world. But Robert E. Howard was very clear, the races that we see today are sort of analogous with these other races here. And to me, the East, and based on what I'm reading in the Robert E. Howard written book, sort of says more, okay, you're talking Asia, like Southeast Asia. You're talking possibly Vietnam, Thailand, maybe China, Japan. Whereas this just took it to say, okay, we're talking Mesoamerica. So that was, I think, a bit of a departure, and it threw me a little bit off. But that's the aside. Get into the story, though. They're moving along. They make their way into the city. They make contact with the locals. Yes, the fight happens. This particular scene here with the head being cloven in half, very large portion of the written book actually pertains to that. Nicely done. They make their way to the individuals who are in the Civil War. I'm not really going to get into the detail and nature of this Civil War mess. What I will say is it's really a convoluted mess. Basically partisanism to its nth degree. It's screwed up. But moot point, Conan and Valeria find themselves fighting from one side. And again, here's that sort of Mesoamerican sort of imagery here again. And basically a large battle breaks out. Everybody dies. Bottom line is everybody on the side that Conan and Valeria are not on die. And then, of course, they're double-crossed by the ruler of the people that they're working for. In the double cross, Conan goes off to verify that they have, in fact, wiped out the enemy, and they try to stab him in the back while he's at it. Pretty sad story, and they obviously try, and this is where the witch tries to take Valeria, catches, obviously, her husband, trying to take Valeria first, but tries to take Valeria for a different purpose in that she wanted to steal her powers. She kills her lover/husband, who is the ruler of the party that Conan's working with. But again, you're going again back to the whole lot of nudity here. A lot of nakedness, except for her, who was the ruler of the, well, she's the witch, let's put it that way. And then this guy comes in and fries everybody. There's the lightning bolts. Again, you're talking about a lot of nakedness. And Conan and Valeria leave, end of story. What I do like within the Ablaze reprints is they do publish the entire story there as well, the written work. So if you ever wanted to do a comparison, you could. So clearly they had copies of the written version. They knew where they distanced themselves from it. And they knew what they were skipping. One big piece that happened right before the bad guys break in, you have Conan here checking into or being put in his room where his quarters are, and then they sort of go to a night scene, and then the other guys break in, and which precipitates the final battle. But what happens in between here is a whole point where, and this is where it gets a little harsh, Valeria is basically attacked by one of the servants under the order of the witch. And Valeria basically ties this poor woman up and whips her to the point where she gives up the information, or is about to give up the information, and then escapes to the catacombs. And you hear this person being killed, and you're thinking to yourself, what in the catacombs killed this person? And you then later find out that it was, lo and behold, laser beam dude over here with his fancy magic that he found. So you missed that piece of the story in this. They jumped it. You know, when I read it in the written version, I sort of said to myself, okay, well, what's the importance of this? And I think the importance in the written version was it really showed Valeria being a strong character in herself, in that somebody attacked her, but she was able to actually fend it off and take care of herself and manage it herself. Again, Robert E. Howard portraying a strong female role, but the issue being that while they're doing that, well, she's literally mercilessly torturing this poor other woman who's just a slave. I don't know, something about that just, it rubs me the wrong way. All right, let's put it that way. So skipping it in here, maybe they did it intentionally. Not entirely sure. Art was good. Story, pretty close. A little bit off. Some of the direct lines from the written work were directly in there. So not bad. Not bad at all. Okay. Let's go back to the actual Savage Storage version here. So we're going with my trade paperback here because this is easier to flip through and I don't really care if it gets destroyed. Maybe one day I'll get somebody to sign this and do stuff to it and then I'll probably care about it, but until then I don't. This is the cover of Savage Tales number 2, and as we say, this is part 1 of Red Nails, which is the latter part. Now, I have commented on this before. I think Barry Windsor-Smith really, and Ernie Chan, I think the two of them really nailed the Conan character. They know the Conan character. They know what it looks like. They know its ins and outs. They know how he's supposed to look. So when I find their work, I find it to really just knock it out of the park, in my opinion, as to what I think Conan should look like, because I completely agree with both of their interpretations of Conan. And this story starts off very close to the written version with the whole dragon thing. So let's start off with that right now. Here's Valeria. It starts with her climbing this rock in the forest, finding the walled city. Conan is nowhere to be found. Clearly she is off on her own, doing her own thing. Conan ends up finding her, and Conan makes his intentions very clear, that he has come for her. Now, what specifically that means, I think that is something that Robert E. Howard and the writers over at Marvel have entirely left that up to your interpretation on purpose. Is that some sort of aggressive, I want her, or is this, okay, I'm willing to work with you and woo you and if you're interested sort of thing? I don't know. I entirely don't know. I don't picture Conan being, well, I know Conan is a wooing person just because of the way I've read the other works that he's done and what he's done when he is interested and how he can actually woo somebody. So maybe the aggressive, hey, I'm just going to take you barbarian sort of mentality isn't what was meant for Conan. But I don't know. Conan comes along, follows her, I want you, woman. That's a very clear statement. And that very clearly was written in the written work as well. But they're interrupted. And here's where you get to this dragon, which sort of looks like a stegosaur with pointy teeth. Yeah, because the stegosaur has killed their horses. And they're stuck in the forest, and they basically find a way to poison this poor thing and blind it. And then they make their way off. As you see, here we are, we're stabbing it with a spear, which is a very pivotal point to the story. That was supposed to show the ingenuity of Conan in actually developing the spear because they couldn't find swatches big enough and timing it correctly and what have you. There's a stegosaurus spikes along its back. Again, I don't know where the pointy teeth on a stegosaurus come from, but what do I know? So they end up making it out. They kill the thing, but again, it isn't a case of Conan killing the thing as you saw in the Ablaze version. What actually happened in the story was the thing was basically following their scent and outrunning them as they were heading towards the plains. They didn't get to the open plains or the desert. And Conan turned because he was carrying Valeria because they couldn't run fast enough. He tossed her to the side and turned to basically face his doom and was basically slammed aside by the creature's shoulder as it brained itself on a tree. This was not Conan killing this creature. Yes, he poisoned it, and maybe it was going to die anyways, but it brained itself. I don't know. It's a thing. They then head out into the desert where they camp in a circle of cacti. Now, I don't know if that's a real thing or not. Clearly, Robert E. Howard is convinced that cacti form in a circle in the desert. Few desert dwellers out there, you tell me. But they find their way to the city. This city does not look Mesoamerican to me, and that does not look Mesoamerican to me. But again, I don't know. Maybe it's because they were going for a theme on the Ablaze version. I don't know. They make their way in. They make contact. Obviously, they get separated. Valeria makes contact with the locals. There's the skull thing she kills, which is actually a really cool part of the story. I'm not going to spoil it for you who haven't read it, but yeah, it's pretty cool. Again, continuing on with the contact, it very closely follows the story. The thing from the catacombs is where the lead up to the Savage Tales, not Savage Sword, Savage Tales #3, and you get into, there's the cover of Savage Tales #3. If you want to see color version, there she be. All right, color version, little black and white version. Not the story of Red Nails at all on the cover. Don't know why they would have done that, considering Red Nails is what it is. But who cares? They find their way in. The story continues to follow along. Again, I like the art of Barry Windsor Smith. It's the detail, and I also like the writing in here because what they were clearly doing was following along with the written book. And they followed it. The story of how they got to the city. Again, the same thing. The outfits that they were wearing doesn't quite match what was written in the book in the Ablaze version. This is pretty, exactly in detail what was written in the written version. So I find, again, just like I found with Tower of the Elephant, clearly they were referencing back to the written material and making sure they were hitting it as they were going. Here's the attack that I mentioned was skipped in the Ablaze version, where they try to drug her, and she's literally whipping this poor woman, who begs for mercy, runs off in the catacombs, and there is the sound of her screaming for help as, obviously, Valeria is not following her to the catacombs because that'd be spooky. And this poor person dies. Immediately jump forward, giant battle royale is precipitated, everybody's covered in blood. Conan heads off to verify that, hey, all the bad guys are dead. I'm not going to get into why all these heads are here. You can read the story yourself. And people are trying to stab Conan in the back. In this story, 2 of them followed him to stab in the back as opposed to 1, which was in the Ablaze version. 2 actually is the number from the written version. And then you get back to, okay, bad guy, king, prince, whatever his name is here, is drugged and is basically forced into torture while she kidnaps Valeria. I don't even know if you'd call it kidnapping because it wasn't really much of a fight because she's like a superpowered witch. And Conan finds Prince, what's his nuts here, breaks them out. The 2 of them actually get into a massive battle. I like this panel here, and this is a key one because throughout the whole story, all Conan and Robert E. Howard have been observing through the narrative of Conan and through the dialogue of Robert E. Howard, or is that backwards? Who cares? Is that you cannot get to the roofs. But then they find this secret place where Conan is looking out, and they made a very clear point. This is the first time Conan looked at the windows and saw these spires and the tops of the towers that were built in the city. And then obviously Prince What's-His-Nuts betrayed him. They got into a big fight, and Conan basically throttled him out, killed him while they were falling down a set of stairs. And again, we get to, okay, the nudity part. This part was actually in the story. This particular nudity part was in the written story. All right, she was completely naked on the altar. And then bad guy shows up and zaps the living crap out of everybody with his fancy laser beams. And, the whole double cross happens. People are stabbed, and she dies. Because Valeria stabs her because, well, she was trying to drain the life out of her, and then they wander off. And there's a particularly funny part in here. I don't even want any of their haunted jewels because they were supposed to be rewarded with jewels by looting the city or by acting as a mercenary for one side or the other. That was in the Ablaze version, and it was a very clear point that was in the written version as well because they decide they're going to go off and basically form a ship. Now, this is kind of a funny part, though. Early in the story, you remember I said that, it wasn't really clear what Conan's intentions were towards Valeria when he just says, I want you. And then you were like, okay, hold on, is this an aggressive I want you, or is this a passive I want you? Is there even a passive version of I want you? Who knows? But here, you have this embrace, they're kissing, and they go off together. Happily, they say they're going to go plundering as pirates together, which does match the Ablaze version. I won't give the Ablaze version attitude for that one. That was very close. But also, both of those were bang on directly into the written story. Now, one of the things, and I'm going to be clear on this is a little aside, one of the reasons why I will oftentimes defer to the magazine size versions is I like the size of them. You get more space for art on this than you do in something comic sized, okay? Here's the Ablaze version over here. All right, you see the difference here? Like these are clearly smaller than this. Now, it doesn't seem like much, but it's something. And when I was digging through my books, trying to make sure that I had the right material to bring out here for you guys, I was convinced that I had seen a color version of Red Nails. Well, there is a color version. I was sure, though, that it was magazine-sized. I was wrong. I looked all over the place, and I found both my magazine-sized Conan books that are colorized, which I think are called Marvel Special Editions or Super Marvel Editions, something like that. I have 2 of them. But they colorized, like, one-off stories. Why? When they went to colorize this, Red Nails, the classic, a Conan classic. When they went to colorize this, they made it comic-sized. And I don't know, something about that. Like, if they just kept this the right size, I would say that this is it. Don't bother going out and buying yourself both of these, number 2 and number 3. Why would you do that? Because you could just go get this and you got a giant colorized version of it. I don't know, maybe some people just like the black and white for the sake of the black and white. But to me, this is a story I would have said to myself, I would like to see, look at that dinosaur. Look at this Stegosaurus in color. Like that, I don't know. I like this. So, aside being there, this is exactly, by the way, page by page, this is exactly what is in here. There is no difference. If you think maybe they shortened it or something, they did not. This is page for page, exactly what is in the Savage Sword. It's simply small, it's comic sized, it's colorized, and away you go. Now, if you go to, let's see, one of the panels in here that I thought was a really cool one. I just want to share this with you because it is colorized. Come on, come on, come on. Where's the Zappy Zappy? There, the Zappy Zappy. That particular panel right there, I'll bring it up to you. Look at that. Look at the Zappy Zappy there. That is just so cool in color. I don't know. Maybe you don't want color, maybe you do. I like the color. I just thought that was particularly cool, so whatever. Yeah, it's got a cool little thing on the back. Look at that. That's not bad. Anyway, so I've given you a summary of both of those now. We started off with the Ablaze one. I said, it's slightly off on the story. The art's a little funky. I don't know where they get this Mesoamerican thing. But at the end of the day, I thought it's a cool interpretation, and I wasn't particularly angry about it at all. I thought it was kind of cool. And when it skipped that one chapter where, Valeria's whipping somebody, I was like, I can kind of see why you'd be skipping that. So, 2 points for that. Then you got this, the Savage Sword version, which I've said, and I've given you the run through there. It was a longer one, because it's a long story. But I gave you the run through saying this is how it's similar. I gave you many, many, many points of its similarity. I showed you the component where it actually had the Valeria whipping that poor servant person and then getting killed. Not by Valeria, by the way. But we walked through that, and we also walked through the fact that, it was very true to the story. I don't think the dinosaur in this was quite so good, though. My 2 cents on that one. Now, do I think a dinosaur is worth saying one is better than the other? Probably not. Probably not. But when you're saying to yourself which one's close to the original, I think hands down that it goes to Savage Sword on this one. I think Ablaze did a good job doing a modern interpretation of this, and I have no issues with that interpretation. I think it's a cool story. I think it's a cool standalone. But if you were to say to me which one is closer to the Robert E. Howard, I would put it on the Savage Sword 100% of the way. This one deviated a fair amount. The outfits were pretty close in here. And this one, I don't understand the fixation with all the boobages that were in this story. To me, it just seemed odd because it wasn't in here or there. And I don't know if this is their depiction of what they think Mesoamerican Aztec and Olmecs were like, but I don't know. I just don't know. So of the 2, I'd say go for this one. So everybody, that is the conclusion here. That's what we're going with. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, once again, I'm going to do the YouTube thing again, and I'm going to say like the video and subscribe. It does help the channel. It helps me get more views, and it tells me you like these, which tells me to keep making them. Now, I think what I will do to close this one off, though, is I'm going to leave you some footage of Gleyber Torres smacking a home run out of the park. Let's go with that.